Oh, I had this this beautiful image in my head when we knew we were thinking Portugal, we were going to buy land, and I just thought that we would have these days that were kind of dreamy and we'd be gardening. I knew it was going to be hard work.
And as with all dreams, sometimes you romanticise them. You watch YouTube, you look at Instagram, and you quite often get a very romanticised version of what it might feel like to live off-grid.
Well, I'm not sure it's all it's made out to be, really.
No, I think it's all a bit of a con, really,
all
myself.
Those Insta shots.
We've discovered in year one, unbeknown to us, that because of the climate change or extreme weather last year, we didn't have enough water to do one of our primary things, which is to be gardening to become self-sustaining.
The difference between my expectations and the reality is I just underestimated how long it would take before we were ready to go, before everything was sort of set up. It might have been more sensible of us to make our very first priority a yurt or a tiny home or reconstructing our ruin.
And would you change and do it differently if you could go back in time, wave a wand? Would you still buy the Wildlands? Would you buy a piece of land with a house in better condition?
Might be tempted by a stone house, because a stone house would be cool in the summer.
It's a lot harder than I expected in
Yes.
every sense. Morning.
Hi, welcome back to the Wildlands, where we are going to do Wednesday's waffles.
And in today's waffles, it's a wet Wildlands, but we're going to talk to you about our expectations of living off-grid versus some of the realities of living off-grid. So enjoy tonight's episode. So welcome back, and it is a very wet day today, which does have some bearing on tonight's episode, where we're going to discuss the difference between the reality and the expectation that we had about living off-grid before we went off-grid. So what were some of the expectations that you had about living off-grid?
Oh, I had this this beautiful image in my head when we knew we were thinking Portugal, we were going to buy land, and I just thought that we would have these days that were kind of dreamy and we'd be gardening. I knew it was going to be hard work, but I kind of thought I'd be gardening all day and then coming back to the yurt or the tiny home in the late afternoon and cooking some food and relaxing, and it just all be really just chilled, and yeah, maybe some chickens puttering about. And you know it's going to be hard work, because gardening is hard work and building things is hard work, but it's kind of, you know, that's satisfying. And it kind of almost was like that at times this year, but it's definitely not like that every day, all the time.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think it's probably the same about anything that you dream about in life. So for us, going off-grid was a dream. And as with all dreams, sometimes you romanticise them. You watch YouTube, you look at Instagram, and you quite often get a very romanticised version of what it might feel like to live off-grid, which is one of the things we want to do with our channel, is to not give you that romanticised version, where possible to give you the reality. And that is the big difference, because you do have this dreamy vision like Missy just painted. I imagined having a tiny little house that was all quaint, a bit like a cabin but made of stone, and you'd be sitting outside with your feet up and a nice cold beer looking across at the mountains. And that is things that happen. We do that quite often.
We do, and I did wander about my garden picking the vegetables and feeding the chickens, but that's like
tiny,
a really small part, less than half of it is that. And it might just be because we're still we're not in year one anymore, but we've just finished year one. So our experience of being off-grid and how hard it is and the challenges have all been the first year, which is going to be the hardest, isn't it? You're going to be setting up and you don't know what you're doing and you haven't got stuff sorted yet.
I think when we've spoken about this to other people that have been off-grid for longer than us, I don't think issue is the right word, but let's use that word. I think the issue is that when you buy a piece of land in a rural place, you have very little, if any, infrastructure. So every day and week that you're here, that infrastructure increases. So then by year 2, 3, 4, you get to a point where you no longer have to build infrastructure because you've done it all. So a simple example would be, we've discovered in year one, unbeknown to us, that because of the climate change or extreme weather last year, we didn't have enough water to do one of our primary things, which is to be gardening to become self-sustaining. So then you have to put in a pond or get a borehole or dig another well or get more water storage, whatever solution it might be.
Yeah.
But once you've achieved that and it works, then that's done until it breaks or leaks or whatever the scenario is.
Yeah.
So then you can move on to the next thing. So
That's
after
right.
a period of time, whether that's 6 months or 6 years, hopefully you get to a point where everything that you need, give or take, to live a fulfilling and enjoyable life is in place. So then you can perhaps enjoy the off-grid experience, as it were, more.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think before we came out, I didn't think about, or I didn't know how time consuming it would be doing the little things. You know, if you want to be warm in the winter, then you have to chop lots and lots of firewood, or you have to spend money to buy the firewood in, and that takes time. And when we were watering the vegetables, we weren't ready to set up an irrigation system yet because we weren't sure how we wanted it set out. So we were spending 3 hours most mornings in the summer, weren't we? 3 hours watering so that the plants didn't die. But again, it wasn't productive, and that's because it wasn't set up yet. So and now we're going to put in the swales. They'll help get the water in the ground. We're going to have the pond. We've got more water storage. So once the swales are in and the garden's been redesigned, then if we want, we can put in drip irrigation, and that's that taken off our shoulders, and then we won't have to spend 3 hours every day watering. And it's stuff like that. I think the main point I'm going to say, the difference between my expectations and the reality, is I just underestimated how long it would take before we were ready to go, before everything was sort of set up.
And as we were saying a lot in our early videos from the Wildlands, it became like a catchphrase for a little while, was it's a lot of work. And it does take you by surprise, particularly when you've got extreme weather on top of the lot of work. So when we arrived, it was very, very hot. And then because we arrived and we started here in mid-late August, within a couple of months we're where we are now, and then it was very, very cold, or getting to that point, or very, very wet.
Rainy, yeah.
Damp.
And at that point, all we had was a tarp. It was an outdoor tarp, supposed to be for sunshade, actually, wasn't it? And that was no good for keeping the rain off. And it was either that or sit in your van while it rains for a week at a time.
And that's why we built the shade house in its kind of uncabin-like structure, because it was designed really initially as not a temporary structure, but somewhere where we could shelter from the rain and be outside, and shelter from the sun and be outside in the shade. And obviously, as you've seen from the videos over the past weeks and months, the shade house is, it's morphing into a bigger structure, and I'm sure that will continue going forward.
It might have been more sensible of us to make our very first priority a yurt or a tiny home or reconstructing our ruin, so that we have something other than the van to live in. And we decided that wasn't a priority because we have the van. But now I think
it was a mistake.
Yeah, when you look at when we lived at a house, everything feels very constant. Maybe you have a normal job as well, and then you go to work in the morning and you come home in the evening and you make your food and you sit on your sofa and you game or you watch telly or you have some friends round. And it's all kind of, as long as you've got enough money to pay your rent or your mortgage and your bills, then it's just all there, isn't it? It's all warm, it's all dry, and you've got your beds there, and
even if you don't want to admit to it, is a kind of structured routine of which most you have little control over, because if you have a job for somebody else, then they dictate when you work. Hypothetically or stereotypically, that might be Monday to Friday 9 to 5, or it might be whatever job you're doing, it might be different, but you are tied to that cycle. Whereas off-grid, I think whilst you have a certain cycle, that might be getting up earlier and going to bed earlier, but you're driven by what's happening at that time of year. So it might be, my God, it's raining, I've got to sort out my chickens to protect them from the damp, or, oh my God, it's really, really hot and I've run out of water. So then you have to be reactive on the fly, whereas perhaps if you're in a house, that would only happen if it's cold and your boiler broke down, as an example.
And of course, some people off-grid do have houses.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because off-grid literally just means that you're not connected to the mains for water, electricity or gas. So you could have a house like that and live quite comfortably.
Yeah.
We're just, so today we're just talking about how it's been for us.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah.
And would you change and do it differently if you could go back in time, wave a wand? Would you still buy the Wildlands? Would you buy a piece of land with a house in better condition?
Might be tempted by a stone house, because a stone house would be cool in the summer and with a proper roof on. And well, I don't know. I love the Wildlands. I love living in nature, and you wouldn't get that if you bought like a house that had more like a yard of garden or a field.
Yep.
That wouldn't be the same. So I don't know.
So for me, we were relatively happily travelling and living in our van as van lifers, if you like to call us. And we were going around Europe. We had lots of aspirations. We wanted to go off to Africa, perhaps to Morocco, or maybe even further afield into Africa. We wanted to go east towards Russia. We wanted to go to colder places, Norway, Denmark. And then the pandemic came along. For various reasons, we ended up getting stuck in the UK. So I had this vision that if I went off-grid, initially it would be buy a piece of land, because then you've got a sort of permanent park up. Not necessarily that you are going to park up permanently, but any time you need some downtime or you don't want to be driving around in your van, you can come to your land. It's safe, it's free, you can park. You don't necessarily have to put any infrastructure in. It could basically be like a car park space in a lovely rural area. And then because of lockdown, I started becoming aware of how little freedom we had. Some of that due to the pandemic and the controls that were coming in from that, and some of it due to the fact that it was becoming perhaps harder to park your van in a wild camping context in many countries in the world. And we were getting a lot more knocks late at night from the police, and who likes that? But it makes your life quite stressful, because you don't know, can I park here and have a few drinks, or will the police come? Do I have to get out of bed, get dressed and move my van? So I thought if I buy a piece of land, then all of that goes away, or I could take that away some of the time. And I also thought that by being off-grid, I would be freer from some of the constraints that I feel I've not consented to within the society that we live in, without sounding like some kind of radical. But in reality, it's pretty much the same as living in a house. You still have to pay tax. You still have to register that you live here. You still have to have a license to live here if you want to do it legally, all of which we do. If you want to build something, you have to have planning permission, or maybe an alternate route to do that, be it farming, support buildings or whatever.
You still have to have money to
You still have to
participate
have
in
money
society.
to participate, unless you've gone way down on the journey and you've got some kind of bartering system in a local community, which is only very infantile here. So the reality is that you're just living outdoors, but you still have a lot of the same constraints and controls that you've always had. So you're not actually getting much freedom that you may have thought you were going to get from the romantic view, you know, of the cabin in the woods looking over.
Yeah, growing your vegetables, eating for free.
Yeah, and again, that's another reality versus expectation, isn't it? You plant carrots and you think, right, well, I've got enough carrots for 3 months there, and then voles come in and eat most of your carrots. So then the reality is
you still got to go to Lidl to buy your carrots.
To buy your carrots. So again, there's so many things, isn't it? So again, reality expectation. I didn't think it would be as hard in all the areas. Too hot, too wet, very expensive, not as free as I thought. A lot of work building things, putting infrastructure in, then you run out of money, or maybe you haven't run out of money, but everything is ridiculously expensive off-grid as it is living in a traditional housing scenario. The cost of living crisis has affected us just as much as everybody else. Diesel for travelling has gone up, wood has gone up for keeping warm and so on. So yeah, I think for me the summary would be it's a lot harder than I expected in every sense, be that financially, you know.
I find there aren't many days where the whole day is a joy. There's a lot of days where you get chunks of joy of stuff, you know, when you're feeding your chickens and they're all happy and that's lovely, or you're cooking a meal with stuff that you've just picked out your garden, that's fantastic. But there's always something. There's always, oh no, this is broken. Oh no, the damp's got into the cupboard and it's gone mouldy. Oh no, the mice have found my stash of dog biscuits. There's always stuff, isn't there?
Yeah.
So it can be quite hard. But I still don't think I'd swap it for a house in the UK and go back to the previous way of living.
No, I 100% would not. So that kind of says a lot. I think a lot of the stresses that perhaps make the expectation different to the reality at the moment, or the other way round, is it's driven by finances. Because if you had a much larger pot of money, then you could go, I'll buy a yurt,
yeah,
and that
sure.
solves this problem.
Yeah,
or
that's true.
I've had my mate Dave to dig my pond, so I'll go down the pool shop tomorrow and I'll buy the liner, and next week the pond's full of water, so that's that problem solved.
Yes.
So a lot of it is financially driven. So that would mean for some people, we've got friends who are far more financially better off than us, and they're happily loving their life and adding to their infrastructure.
Although I must add, I've just seen a comment on your last video about the kitchen cabin build, and they said they thought that if money was no issue, then our kitchen probably wouldn't, and the cabin as well, wouldn't have looked as great as it does, because we had to innovate and we worked with the pallets to, because they were cheaper than going out and buying wood, or we would have bought ready-made this or that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's very true, because when I started the plans for the bathroom and shower cabin, which we, as you know from previous videos, we've got some of the floor and the foundation done on, but we looked at should we use pallets, and then we stripped a few pallets and went, no, that's a lot of hard work, and it didn't feel like it would be particularly cost effective.
No.
Versus the work of stripping. It would take us, I think I calculated, at least 3 weeks working every day for 5 hours to strip enough pallets to just put the outside walls up. But when we came to the kitchen, because we were already at a point where we were skintier than we had been, it was like, let's build it out of pallets.
Yeah.
And then the reality was that actually it's beautiful. I would never have considered that building out of cheap pallets would make it so pretty.
They say necessity is the mother of invention, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to get creative.
Another example which you guys don't know about is a couple of months ago on our what we would like for the Wildlands list, we went out and we chose a really nice wrought iron double gate that we were going to put at the entrance for security, really, and peace of mind. And also we get a lot of people, I say a lot of people, we periodically get farmers and hunters turning in our drive, so if we have a gate, that stops that. The gate was like 500 quid, so now I'm looking at, can I build a gate that would create the same perception of security, and can I make it out of wood, and can I do it for like 20 quid?
Yep.
And the answer is possibly. So at the moment I'm planning that out, and tomorrow I'm going to look at hinges and seeing whether we can afford to have, a pre-50 quid gate as to a more than 500 quid gate. So it does make you creative, I think.
Yeah.
Being poorer.
And I think, I don't know if it's necessarily perception versus reality, but house life versus this life. Because the house was warm and dry and cosy and has all your stuff in it, I didn't go outside as much as I do now. And if I did go outside, it would be, we have to walk the dogs. So you put on all your gear and you go outside and you walk the dogs and you get home and then you're back in your house. Or you walk into town and you call that, I'm outside because I'm walking. But we live outside all day long, don't we?
Yeah.
Occasionally, I'll go in the van in the afternoon to work or something if it's particularly cold outside. But generally, we're outside all day long, and I find that has massively affected my state of mind. I'm a lot calmer, have more peace inside. I don't know, I just feel more expansive because you're outside with the views and the nature and the weather.
That's a good point. I mean, I spend a minimum of 14 hours a day outside. It might be 16 or more, but it's at least 14. So take today, we're talking to you now, it's raining outside. It's been raining since we got up. We've been up since 7:30. We've been outside from 7:30 and it's still raining now. And I think that for me, my it's had a massive impact on my well-being. So even at the moment where I'm stressed by the fact that we've got a lot less money than we need, I'm stressed by the fact that our visa's still not approved, I'm stressed by all those kind of things, and yet my mental health is still relatively healthy. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we spend so much time outside in clean air, in a rural environments surrounded by nature and trees, and that's got to be good for the well-being of people generally, me obviously included, and you.
So I think that answers, when you asked me the question earlier, would I swap this land for land with a house? Probably not. I would like to have a building, but we have one that we could reconstruct slightly, that you could go in when it's really hot, but you don't want to leave the land to go to the lake. It might be cool in there to spend a little bit of time. Or I wouldn't mind a bathtub. Bathroom with a bathtub. I mean, that's not going to happen here. But so those are the things that would be nice about a house. But I think if we had a normal kind of house with different rooms in it for different people, we'd be back. There'd be no different to living in England.
Yeah, it'd be
we'd
the
be
same,
back to
but
being
we'd
in
be
different
living
rooms.
in a house environment, but in rural Portugal.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like we went and visited people the other week who were off grid and they weren't connected to the grid, and they have a lovely house. But compared to us, I think their life was more like our life used to be when we lived in a house. So you're exactly right. So I think, to summarise, the reality versus the expectation is considerably different in many ways and not in other ways.
And do you know what? People that haven't gone and done this journey, I think, will probably be shouting at their tellies about now, going, "Oh, you're so naive. Obviously it wasn't going to be like on Instagram." And yeah, that's fine. But I think if I hadn't thought it was going to be all fantastic and skipping through the daisies with a basket of flowers on my arm, then maybe I wouldn't have been as tempted to do it.
Yeah, true. And I wasn't saying that from the perspective that I've made a mistake and that I'm now looking back going, my God, it's a lot harder than I thought. You know, a good example of that is you see a lot of criticism of van life people, particularly on Instagram, because they project this, you know, you've got your feet out the back of your van, you've got a view of the mountains or the sea, and then you've got other van lifers going, oh, it's not real van life, you know, when you're on an industrial estate and you've got no water and your heating's not working, and of course that's true.
But they're both true.
But they're both true.
Because the people taking those photos did get those photos. Those moments do happen in life.
I remember making a video on Black Sands and then a second video with Goff when we were here, where we were saying that actually for us, the reality is that van life is better than those romantic Instagram moments, because you are free, despite what I said earlier about the fact that you're still not free.
So Dominic, what do you think of this van life malarkey?
Well, I'm not sure it's all it's made out to be, really.
No, I think it's all a bit of a con, really,
All
myself.
those Insta shots.
All these instant shots.
They never really happen, do they? I mean, it's got to be a setup.
No, life is never really like this, you know?
No, we never really just swim and drink beer in the sun.
No, we never do. You know, it doesn't happen. It's all
Car parks, and
delusion.
industrial estates, isn't it?
Car parks, lay-bys,
Lay-bys, yeah.
Rain.
driving
Motorway
rain,
services.
drawn up by the wheels of Arctics as they go by.
So, I don't recommend van life.
No, I wouldn't recommend it.
No, don't come out here.
No, don't come here.
Do not come to Portugal.
So it's difficult to quantify, but I think in some ways living off-grid is probably, when I think about it, better than what we've just said, because you've got things like there's a fabulous community, there's a lot of help, and a lot more help that I felt wasn't available when you live a traditional lifestyle in bricks and mortar. Whether that's financial help, physical help, building help, general help, just there's a lot of, I think it's probably because everybody living off-grid in one way or another is going through some kind of process of...
That's what I think it is.
So then there's an understanding of what it feels like. So it's like, my God, those people over there have just arrived on their land, haven't got any structure. Oh, do you remember what that was like? That was harsh. Let's go and help them get some structure on the land. There's a lot of offers. So that was a reality that I wasn't expecting. That was wonderful. It's always easy to look at negative things.
Yeah, to go, what do you expect? I expected it to be great, and it wasn't. Yeah. But it's definitely a flip side.
And I think it's also, I've become clouded because obviously, like I've said earlier in the video and we said on other videos, We've got less money than we had, and we've had this ongoing visa situation, so that kind of puts a cloud on everything. So sometimes perhaps you don't always see the amazing things that are actually better than what you expected.
Yeah. Usually when it's one thing after another and they've kind of stacked up, and instead of having lots of days that are fantastic and then a day that where something bit pants happens, it just feels like it's lots and lots of, and then of course you can get into that negative spiral where then all you're doing is seeing all of the negative things. You're like, oh, this has happened and that's happened, and you forget to look for the joy and the fabulousness.
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as the last video where we did the 1 year edit of the shade house and kitchen build and so on. Even for me, watching that back, even though most of it was within the last year, you very easily forget, and it's easy to take for granted now that when it's raining, we're dry. When it's cold, we have a fire. We can cook outside. We've cooked outside many times now when it's been raining. That's all fine.
I think it was Off-Grid Bruce, and he said something like, it's easy to take for granted or to forget how far you've come and what you've done because you're constantly going for progress. So each day it's like, what do I need to build today to make life better? What's the next project? What can we do here? You know, there's a great long list of things that needs doing, and you forget all these wonderful things. You know, you've got eggs every day, and Rosie and I go and love sitting with the chickens, and that's fantastic. And that's because we put all that work into building the chicken coop and the fence and everything.
Yeah.
And like you say about sitting here warm and dry and cooking, but there's so many other things, aren't there, on the land that are just fantastic. All the friends that we have to come and stay because we put the drive in.
Absolutely. And I think another thing that is quite poignant, not quite on subject, but to compare to house living that we shouldn't take for granted is once you've got the infrastructure in. So for example, having just completed our solar system with Greg the week before the roof went on the kitchen, that now means that for 5 years probably that equipment will last. We've got an abundance of electricity, so everything that we need that we were struggling with electrically wise that's now resolved. So that's amazing. So if we were in a house, we'd still be paying hundreds of pounds a month for our electricity, whether we were
more these days because of everybody having to suffer through that.
So that's a reality of off-grid living, a bit like van life, that once you have that in place, then it saves you a lot of money. So in reality, if we were not travelling around in the van at all and we went shopping once a month, we could live on a very meagre budget because we'd only have to buy our food. We wouldn't have to pay for anything else. Yeah. So I think it will get easier.
It will. With every year that goes by, it feels like a long time a year when you're chugging through it. But now I can look back and go, we've just done this year, and it's, gosh, we've achieved so much. We've put so much in place. Yeah, you have to redo some of it. We're going to redo the swales, do this, do that. But every year it's going to get easier, I think.
Yeah.
I reckon we should make a video like this in 5 years' time. Go, what were our expectations? Oh, I thought life was going to be hard like this every single day. But actually, now it's wonderful. I'm skipping through the daisies with a basket of flowers on my arm.
The Sound of Music style. I guess the sensible thing to do would be to look at our expectations and realities, and where they're differing is to make a list and then look at what the solution would be to make
That's a good idea.
Where you are, and if it's not where you want to be, what do I need to put into place to make that? And then can I do it on a real budget or no budget versus up to what could I do if I had a higher budget?
That's a really good point. And I think we don't do that enough. No. Because we're caught up in the day-to-day.
We're impulsive,
like,
and reactive.
Oh gosh, we've got up, what do we need to do? We need to make a video, we need to feed the chickens, we need to do and it's a good idea to stop and take stock and go, where do we want to be this time next year? And how are we going to make that happen? That'll be in an upcoming Wednesday Wildlands waffle.
So I think that's plenty of waffle.
I think we've waffled at you enough.
We have indeed.
I hope you've enjoyed our meanderings and thoughts about it. If you're thinking about going off-grid yourself, food for thought.
And if you're thinking of going off-grid and you're new to the channel, then you may not be aware that you can come and stay on the Wildlands if you'd like to. Go in the comments, leave a message, I'll send you our email address and let you know how you can come and stay on the Wildlands. Also, if you're new to the channel, or even if you've just watched a couple of episodes, if you've yet to subscribe, please do subscribe so that you can stay up to date with what happens to us and our adventures and journey across off-grid living as we make new discoveries every week.
We put out 2 videos every week. On the Wednesday, it's just a waffle about life. And on the Sunday evenings, it's a vlog, so it's about what we've been up to that week or our latest project or what have you.
So, thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in a few days for our next video.
Bye.